Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome to my lecture on Chapter 5 of Interaction Design 4th Edition. Chapter 5 is called Emotional Interaction. So, we're going to take a look at the emotional side here, and this is something that we've talked about in our introductory usability course. So for those of you who have had the introductory usability course, you're not going to be too surprised about these ideas. We're going to be talking about emotions in the user experience. We're going to be talking about expressive interfaces and in some cases annoying interfaces, models of emotion, automatic emotion recognition and emotional technologies, persuasive technologies and behavioral change, and anthropomorphism, pros and cons. So human-computer interaction has traditionally been about designing efficient and effective systems. Now, we want to be able to concentrate on designing those interactive systems in a way that encourage people. I'm not going to say we make people respond. We encourage them to respond in certain ways. We want them to be happier, in a good mood, or trusting, ready to learn, motivated. So emotional interaction is concerned with how we feel and react when interacting with technologies. So here's an example of a common IT task, filling in a survey, and a designer who went at it with the idea that they would make this more emotionally pleasing. So Woofu is the name of the forms application, and they wanted to make this kind of fun and playful, like a Fisher-Price toy. And when I look at it, I have to say it has sort of a Fisher-Price kind of a look. It has their kind of coloring, and maybe the logo has a little bit of whimsy to it, and everything's kind of straightforward and easy to read. So, well, that's good. The problem is I'd rather play with a Fisher-Price toy than I would answer a form. So, is this better than a nasty form? Sure it is. It's still a form. It's still a survey. So let's talk about emotional interaction. What makes us happy, sad, annoyed, anxious, frustrated, motivated, so on? Well, depending upon the feelings that are elicited, we're going to get a different user experience. We also know that people have a tendency to become attached to certain products, maybe something like a virtual pet. So we're kind of interested in, is there some emotional dimension to that interaction that makes that likely to happen? Going further on that, could we take advantage of that to create robots, for instance, that could help us to reduce loneliness or to improve our feelings of well-being? I certainly have seen quite a few of those in the news in recent months. And how can we change human behavior through the use of emotive feedback? We've got some places where we talk about things like the applications that try to get us to exercise more or to conserve water or power or those kinds of things. So the activity, one of the activities that's suggested in the chapter is having us go back and think of some kind of really significant purchase that we made online. Of course, that assumes that we would make a significant purchase online. I know that I qualify. I've bought computers online, for instance, a vacation online, not a fridge, I don't think. And how many different emotions did you go through? And what we're really trying to get you in touch with is there are some emotions that are kind of baked into the activity itself. Okay, buying something big is, it can be worrisome, it can be exciting, it can be frustrating. I mean, there's a lot on the line. And then, of course, the way the interface has been designed is either going to help this be a more pleasurable and tolerable activity, or perhaps make it much worse. We have several models introduced in the chapters, but the main one, the big one, is the one we see on the slide here. It's the emotional design model by Norman, Ortoni, and Ravel from 2004. And they see our emotional, I was going to say behavior, but they see our emotional activity operating on three separate levels. We can have visceral, which is just reactive. Okay, we're just boom. Emotional reactions. We have behavioral, which we have some sensations, and that leads to certain feelings, and allows us to get in touch with certain motivations, and then we behave. So there is a bit of a delay there, and some deliberation. And then on the highest kind of level, it's reflective. So still driven in an emotional sense, less immediate than the visceral and the behavioral, and more, more reflective. So, what are some of the claims from the model? So, our emotional state changes how we think. So, when we're frightened or angry, we focus narrowly, and our body responds to tensing by tensing muscles and sweating. So, we're less likely to be tolerant when we're frightened or angry. When we're happy, we're less focused and the body relaxes, more likely to overlook minor problems in the user interface or to be more creative. So the emotional experience that the product is serving up can make it easier to do what we're trying to do, or make it harder to do what we're trying to do. I don't think that we often want to, I don't think that we often want to get our users to tense up. Although there are, I think, cases where we want them to pay attention, right? So perhaps we've been playful for a while and we're kind of encouraging them to explore, but we're about to have them make a decision in which, either the experimental subject is going to be shocked or rewarded, right? So it's going to have some real teeth in it. Well, we might want to sober them up before we gave them that decision to make, and not have them be inappropriately playful. So another activity suggested to us in the chapter was asking us, do we feel more creative when we're in a happy mood? Do we get less work done when we're feeling stressed? And I personally, when I was doing the prep on this chapter again, I thought through these and I thought, yeah, these things are true. I do feel more creative when I'm in a happy mood. Now, whether I turn out more creative work or not, that'd be interesting to say. But I certainly feel that way, I think. And I know that when I feel stressed, I just seem to, maybe to a certain point, again, some amount of stress will kind of get me serious, get me to concentrate on this. But pretty soon, as you increase the stress, I'm just going to get less and less done, to the extent that when it's really high stress, I find I'm getting very little done at all. So I'm kind of wondering, I'm hoping that you thought through these on your own and wondering if your experiences may be similar to mine or different. Let's talk about expressive interfaces. So expressive interfaces can provide reassuring feedback that can be both informative and fun. But it can also be intrusive, causing people to get annoyed and even angry. We had some good example of these in the book. So color, icons, sounds, graphical elements, animations are used to make the look and feel of the interface appealing. It's going to convey some emotional state. In turn, this can affect the usability of the interface. People are prepared to put up with certain aspects of an interface, for example, slow response time that comes from limited bandwidth, if the end result is appealing and aesthetic. And it probably depends upon your user. There are probably some users who like the pretty, right? And they'll wait for it. And there's some users who just kind of stew there and get angry as you're drawing the pretty picture. So I don't think there's absolute truth in this one way or the other. Friendly interfaces kind of relates to this subject, and there's been a lot of work done on this, both in research and in kind of actual products or prototypical products. So Microsoft put a lot of time and money into this At Home with Bob software interface. And it was based on 3D metaphors and familiar places and all those kinds of things. They eventually gave up on that, but it wasn't their last attempt to come up with a friendly interface. In fact, Clippy, who's going to come up in another slide or two, is kind of a son of Bob to a certain extent. Sometimes you see products are designed to use pets like a bunny or a dog were included to talk to the user. And the idea here is maybe it's going to make the user feel more at ease and comfortable. And I think the experience has been among the people who have tried to do this that it is successful for some of the users. And here's a picture of At Home with Bob, looking very folksy. Also looking very 1990s. Okay. This was developed with Windows 95. Clippy. Okay, Clippy came out with Windows 98, if I recall. And Clippy was a little animated help agent that would pop up whenever it damn well wanted to, and would give you some advice and offer some greater help. Why did most people dislike it. Um, well, it tended to show up when I didn't need it. So it had a way of being too available, I think. Was it annoying? Yeah, I thought it was annoying. Distracting sometimes. Patronizing. Well, I think these things can appear to be patronizing. What sort of user liked Clippy? Now I want you to guess, and I'm hoping you're going to say, well, the beginner. Clippy seems to get at a lot of the beginner issues, which is why Clippy had that checkbox that says, don't show me this tip again. The idea being that when you're not a beginner any longer, you're not going to have a need for Clippy. Well, I would imagine that you don't want to create frustrating interfaces. I know that I don't, although it's kind of funny to think about creating them on purpose. Now, there's all kinds of causes of frustration in the user interface, and here we have uh, an interesting but not exhaustive list. When the application doesn't work properly or crashes, when the system doesn't do what the user wants it to do, when the user's expectations are not met, when a system does not provide sufficient information to enable the user to know what to do, so you're kind of at a loss for where to go next. When error messages pop up that are vague, obtuse, or condemning, when the appearance of an interface is garish, noisy, gimmicky, or patronizing, or perhaps all of the above. That probably I would give all of those or most of those to At Home with Bob. When a system requires users to carry out too many steps to perform a task, only to discover a mistake that was made earlier, and they need to start all over again. Well, those aren't all the things that make me frustrated, but certainly is a good list. So, gimmicks can be amusing to the designer, but not to the users. So, clicking on a link to a website only to discover that it is still under construction. I don't see that as being gimmicky. Okay. It's maybe rude, right? So, that doesn't actually, for me, that really doesn't fall into gimmicks. Okay. Gimmicks would be some kind of trick that would appear to do something. Well, I guess the gimmick here is you appear to have a feature and then, you don't have the feature. So the gimmick is in appearing to have a feature. So, okay, I'll give them the gimmicky. Error messages. Error messages can be quite frustrating. So the example we have up on the very top, the application word wonder has unexpectedly quit due to a type 2 error. Why not instead say the application has unexpectedly quit due to poor coding in the operating system? Well, we don't know that it's in the operating system. Okay, so there are all kinds of things that you can do either right or wrong with error messages. Schneiderman, really one of the fathers of human-computer interaction work in the information science field. He says we ought to do things like this. Avoid using terms like fatal, invalid, or bad. They're kind of pejorative terms. Audio warnings. Well, audio warnings can be both good and bad. In a really important case to get your attention, an audio warning is probably warranted. Pretty soon, it's just annoying. avoid uppercase and long coded numbers. Um, these are just based upon the research. Uppercase is harder to read than mixed case, and long blocks of numbers are hard to read and harder to memorize. Messages should be precise rather than vague and provide context-sensitive help. So context-sensitive help is a pretty cool feature in that the user doesn't have to be looking at the help all the time, but when they ask for help, the help feature knows where they are and hopefully what they're trying to do and gives them help that they don't have to sift through levels and levels of menus for help in order to get to what they want. They get help for the activity that they're currently involved in. We've all seen the famous 404 webpage not found. Okay. What we see here looks like a custom page. It looks like it's not something that just came up in the browser. So it looks like this is an application that has interrupted. It's handled a 404 error. On the other hand, it hasn't done anything constructive with it at all. Or perhaps it does have some constructed things. Please verify that you type blah, 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 blah. But what's really prominent here is you've done something wrong. And certainly error is pretty sharp. Okay, so I'm sure we've all been to a 404 announcement page that was much more friendly and helpful than this. Here are some more helpful error messages. The requested page, and you say what it is not available on the web server. If you followed a link or bookmarked the page, so a little bit helpful there. This, in comparison to the page that we saw before, is more consultative, and it takes it's really creating a kind of a calm and cheery emotional tone, whereas the one before it is just it's grating on my nerves. Really good discussion in the text about this issue of should computers say they're sorry. So there was research done by Reeves and Nas in 96, and they argue that computers should be made to apologize. They should emulate human etiquette. And of course, when you do something wrong in appropriate human etiquette, we apologize. Would users be as forgiving of computers saying sorry as people are of each other when they're saying they're sorry? How sincere would they think the computer was being? For example, after a system crash, I'm really sorry I crashed. I'll try not to do it again. Okay, so the research indicated that when handled the right way, some apology was helpful. Okay, so users had a better overall experience if they were apologized to after some kind of a system shortcoming than if they weren't. Certainly, to the extent that the application apologizing appears to be insincere, well, that's just going to make it worse. One example I think of, on the Apple iPhone, we've had Siri now for quite a while, certainly 5 years, probably going on 6. And so I've been using Siri for a long time. And one of the things I'd love to use Siri for is, say I would be teaching all day at a client site, and I'd get in the car and I'd want to call my wife. So of course I'd be trying to drive and to talk at the same time. So I'd get Siri's attention and say, "Call my wife, iPhone," just like the ad. And Siri would do some talking, and I think this is still probably true of Siri. A lot of Siri's intelligence is back in Cupertino, California. And so her ability to do things like call my wife have to do with her ability to send that request, the raw form of that request to Cupertino, and then get an answer back that allows her to know who my wife is in my address book and all that kind of stuff. Or at least to know that's what I've asked for. And along about sometime between 4:30 and 5:30, I find that PM that a lot of people are trying to do the same kind of thing. You know, they're not all saying call my wife. Some people are saying call Aunt Sally, and some people are saying find the nearest watering hole. But the fact is that there are a lot of these kinds of requests, and the system gets overburdened, to which Siri typically waits a long time, and then she'll go, "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry that I can't help you with that right now. Is there anything else I can do with that?" And you know what? I like that. I really do. I mean, I know I kind of get this idea she's tried for a while because there's a delay, right? And then when she gives up, she's apologetic, and I take it to be sincere. So there is a version of this, in my experience, works that would bear out the research that we're talking about on this slide. Certainly, you can handle it wrong and get worse results than if you never apologized at all. But Siri, in this particular instance, has got a good balance. Next up, we're going to be talking about technology that can detect, or at least it purports to detect, emotions. So it's possible for us to have devices that have some sensing capabilities. The example referred to in the text, most of the examples had to do with recognizing facial things, and of course, one could do that with with a camera that was part of your laptop. So you would be able to measure facial expressions, gestures, body movement, those kinds of things. The aim is to predict the user's emotions and aspects of their behavior. And some of the researchers are trying to influence buying behavior. I mean, that's these research questions that have a payoff at the end tend to be pretty popular, because if in fact there's a way to figure out a way to influence people to buy things, either when they're feeling sad or bored or happy, well, then that's going to make the economy run faster. Now, whether that's a good idea or not depends upon your philosophical point of view. So facial coding is this way of measuring the user's emotions as they interact with a computer or a tablet. It analyzes the images that are captured by a webcam of their face. They use this to gauge how engaged the user is when looking at movies, online shopping sites, ads. And the practitioners have been able to come up with the ability to recognize 6 core expressions: sad, happy, disgust, fear, surprise, and anger. So, theoretically, you could do this kind of stuff in your application. And here are some webcam shots that give us the idea that maybe there's something to this. How would you use this emotional data? Well, if the user screws up their face when an ad pops up, well, they feel disgust. If they start smiling, well, then they're feeling happy. The website could adapt its ad, movie storyline, or content to match the perceived emotional state. We can do eye tracking, finger pulse, speech and words and phrases also analyze when tweeting or posting to Facebook. So we can measure all kinds of things and try to extract emotional content from them. Before we get to the end of this slide, we're going to ask you if you really think that this is a good idea. So this kind of technology is being used more to infer, to predict someone's behavior. For example, determining a person's suitability for a job or how they would vote in an election. And they're asking us, do we think it's creepy that technology can read your emotions from your facial expressions or from your tweets? And this is the kind of stuff that we talk about in our Introduction to Information Science classes a lot. To the extent that the technology allows us to detect these things, should we go ahead and do it? And there are various points of view. Most people seem to feel that if you're going to make a public, if you're going to publish tweets or Facebook posts, and they're going to be public, well then if somebody wants to mine them for seeing what your feelings or your intentions are, then they're probably fair game. Not everybody agrees with that. But I think most of us would have a hard time with somebody turning on the camera on our computer without our express permission in order to decide what content they wanted to show us, or to somehow influence our behavior to buy. Okay, for me that crosses a line. You have to ask yourself whether that crosses a line for you. Now, one of the interesting things about our technology landscape these days is that we have a lot of devices that are so-called smart. So, for instance, here I'm looking at my new smart watch that I got over the holidays, and it interacts with my iPhone. And through my iPhone, it's able to, I'm able to sync the data that comes from the watch about my activities. I'm able to sync them with the iPhone app, and then the iPhone actually puts the data onto a web service where I can go to a web app and I can analyze my activity and all that kinds of stuff. And this is just one case of one of these interactive computing systems that's deliberately designed to change attitudes and behaviors. The idea here is that I should be able to increase my activity or improve my training or something based upon the application. One example is Nintendo's Pocket Pikachu, which is an activity monitor that is based upon a pet. And so the digital pet lives in the device, and it's required to walk, run, or jump. And if the owner doesn't exercise, the virtual pet becomes angry and refuses to play anymore. Well, that's one way to do it. There's all kinds of ways to do it. For instance, we can monitor, we can nag, we can send personalized messages intermittently to a person. One of the things that I get fairly often is a thing where my smartwatch will buzz, and when I look down, it's telling me to move. It hasn't really worked for me that much, but it seems to work for my wife. I see her get up from time to time. I go, "What's up?" And she goes, "Oh, my watch just told me it was time to move, and so I'm going to go and get a glass of water and walk around the house." So it does seem to work for some people and not for others. If in fact we're going to try to affect people's behavior, then the question is, how are we going to do it? And what we have here on the slide are three different approaches. The approach on the left is simply a banner trying to get people to climb stairs in 2010 and claiming that elevators are for wimps. Okay? Not particularly interactive. And not particularly enticing, kind of throwing down the gauntlet of if you're going to use the elevator instead of the stairs, you're a wimp. In the middle, we see an enticing technology. Here are little lights that are going to guide us to the stairway. And then the one on the right has these little orbs or balloons that are going to change their behavior on the basis of how many people are using the stairway. So we begin to see some feedback. So one of the interesting things that I really like about this idea is that here's a whole new range of applications. These are applications where we're trying to affect our behavior or our awareness with the idea that maybe increasing awareness is going to change behavior. These are things that were probably not economically feasible before we had the computing technology that we have today. And so we're still discovering what works. We have some ideas here. The idea that these more enticing things, like the lights, or more kind of non-interrupting feedback, things like the orbs or the balloons, these have a lot of promise. Here on slide number 29, we're talking more specifically about the trackers, which would include my smartwatch. And the kind of things that people do. At first, we monitor all this activity. And some of the applications allow us to compare ourselves with online leaderboards and charts. We can compare ourselves to peers and friends. Or we could have some applications that can maybe help us to reflect on our level of training and fitness. For me, I think that there's probably no one good, perfect design of all of these things. I think that we're going to figure out what works in what situations. Having my watch vibrate and tell me to move, it's not too too disruptive. I wouldn't have turned it on if I had to turn it on, but now that it's on, well, I'm okay. I can kind of take that. Having little lights that are going to entice me to take the stairs, well, I kind of like that, you know. So I think what we're going to find is that certain ways of interacting with this activity data is going to appeal to different people and maybe at different times too. For instance, I was out earlier this week taking a hike, and when I came back, I wanted to sync up my smartwatch with my iPhone and then take a look at my heart rate over the course of the hike. And I'd like to see how high it goes, and because I can kind of imagine what the terrain's like and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's that's something that I'm really only interested in if I've done something like a hike. So I'm thinking that we're going to discover a lot more about people's preferences in this regard, and a lot of the ways of interacting with these kinds of tracking devices and applications. A lot of the good ones haven't even been invented yet. Perhaps you'll invent them. Here are some devices that are to encourage us to reduce energy consumption. The one on the left, as I understand it, allows us to visualize the amount of energy that we're using by seeing how much light is going on in the cord to the power strip. Of course, what worries me is that isn't that yet consuming energy in its own right? Maybe it's not. I don't know. The device on the right, we have one of these at home. It's something that you can use to see how much power is being consumed by an individual device or group of devices, such that you can get some idea about what kind of behaviors have what kind of cost impact. And we found that pretty helpful. It's not something we look at every day, but we look at it maybe a couple times a year. Here's an example where they collected all these data about power usage in a city in Great Britain, and they gave the feedback on the street in chalk. So they had a chalk printer, and they would print the results on the street. And they think that they got people to reduce their consumption by 15%, which for this kind of a study was a whole lot. Now, I don't know how you could do this. It probably wouldn't work quite so well if this was a rainy climate, because the chalk wouldn't stay long enough, right? But still, interesting idea. So when we're talking about emotions and the user interface, we really have to talk about trust. Trust being both according to this slide, a bad and a good thing. So phishing, which we all know about, is using computing applications like email and the web to get people to disclose their confidential information so that you can steal from them. And so this is a case where people are using the application to create the emotional response of trust when it's undue, okay? And then, of course, we were talking a little bit earlier about situations in which you would perhaps make a major purchase in a web application. Of course, people are going to be reluctant to do that unless the application can generate a pretty high level of trust. So, what kind of user interface experiences engender trust and don't trigger mistrust is going to be pretty important stuff to our financial future. And we also want to talk about the use of anthropomorphism or zoomorphism in user interfaces. So anthropomorphism, we know from long ago, is attributing human-like qualities to inanimate objects, e.g. cars and computers. And people have been using this kind of anthropomorphism in advertising. Advertising. You see things that dance and talk and joke and all kinds of stuff. And we've seen designers try to use this in human-computer interaction. Some of these things work well. So, for instance, Siri and her counterparts, I think, are enjoying a lot of success in pretending to be human. Clippy, on the other hand, was a pain in the ass. So, certainly, and I guess that Clippy was zoomorphic because he was more animal-like. Well, he was an animated paperclip, so maybe he was paperclip-morphic. Who knows? But there are good things and bad, and I think it's important for us to just look at the examples of the use of these animated interface elements and see what we like and see what our users like. There are qualities that people are definitely liking, and that there are some that definitely turn people off. And again, I think the best example for me on the positive side as an Apple user is Siri, who I kind of like. I kind of like Siri. One of the one of the fun things about Siri is that you can curse at her or him if you turn it into a him. You can curse at Siri, and Siri will have a sense of humor about it. We'll say things like "your language" or certain things like that. I mean, you can really have some fun with Siri in either asking Siri some humorous things or being rude to Siri or those kinds of things, and get some really entertaining and playful responses, which I really enjoy. It makes it, again, it's a positive experience. So for me, Siri is a home run, and Clippy was a bust. Most people like to be, they don't want the computer to yell at them, okay? And they don't want the computer to give them instructions in a way that they wouldn't want people to do it. So as a welcome, we might want to say, "Hello, Chris. Nice to see you again. Welcome back. Let's start number 5 again, okay? As compared to user 24, commence exercise 5. Again, some of these applications that appropriately mimic polite human behavior and encouraging human behavior, people do like. They respond well to these things. Um, there's a little bit of there's research that would indicate that it's possible to to personalize this to the extent that you lose your audience, and that I kind of liken this in my mind to uh, people. There are people who personalize the way they talk to you, and it seems very manipulative. People who use my name too often. You know, well, Kevin, blah 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 blah, Kevin. Well, you know, Kevin. That it's just like, yeah, I know I'm Kevin. I'm Kevin. Okay, so you can get away with saying, well, Kevin, once, and you seem kind of friendly. If you say it twice, you've raised my antenna. If you say it over and over again, you definitely have gotten on my bad list, because it's sort of a disingenuous thing to do. And so application interfaces that are trying to be anthropomorphic have the same kind of pitfalls as people do. There's certain behavior patterns that engender trust and relaxation and playfulness and creativity, and there's certain that just grate on your nerve. And well, we want to do more of the former and less of the latter. So, which do you prefer? Well, we definitely don't want to be scolded. Okay, and it's kind of funny, having been in computing as long as I have. I really go back to these conversational applications when we first began to have online systems with it that would be just downright rude. Error on line 45. Just really didn't try at all to either to be encouraging or polite or whatever. Definitely people, on one hand, they don't want to be barked at, and they would like encouragement. On the other hand, they don't want to be patronized. So you've got to really thread the needle right through you have to get it right into the sweet spot. So Reeves and Nas found that computers that flatter and praise users in education software programs had a positive impact on them. And students were more willing to continue with the exercises with this kind of feedback. So if you pull it off, I think there's some good potential gain. I keep going back to Siri. I think that Siri pulls it off. I don't have a lot of experience with her competitors, but I suspect that they're comparable. Criticisms of anthropomorphism: it's deceptive. It can make people feel anxious, inferior, or stupid. Well, it depends on what you say and how you say it. People tend not to like screen characters that wave their fingers at the user and say, "Now, Chris, that's not right." But of course, they don't like humans that do that either. They may prefer it more impersonal. Incorrect. Try again. I think that for me, the truth of the name is just you can only use a person's name so many times before you sound like you're being completely manipulative. Studies have shown that personalized feedback is considered to be less honest and makes users feel less responsible for their actions. And this is, again, I think that if you go too far, you have this idea of there's there's a disingenuousness that comes through that, or is it a disingenuity? Well, I'm sure somebody will figure it out and tell me. But you appear to be disingenuous. That's what I'm saying. And I think the last of the bullets on this slide really falls into that category when I really give it some thought. Virtual characters. These are characters that appear on the screens in the form of sales agents, characters in video games, learning companions, wizards, pets, newsreaders. It provides a persona that is welcoming, has the personality, and makes the user feel involved with them. So, a lot of opportunity for upside there. Disadvantages. It can lead people into a false sense of belief, enticing them to confide personal secrets with chatbots. Right? So if you create a chatbot that's seductive enough, you might get people to reveal secrets that they wouldn't have if they knew they were revealing them to a chatbot. They can be annoying and frustrating, like our friend Clippy, or they may not be trustworthy, like, for instance, virtual shop assistants. And this is kind of interesting because most of us have a pretty sophisticated sense of figuring out how trustworthy a salesperson is when we're dealing with them in the flesh. And maybe also if we have them on the telephone, right? We've even gotten to that point. But how do we know how trustworthy a virtual assistant is? Well, perhaps through experience. But if we don't have any experience with them, it's kind of interesting. What's going to get us to trust them? I mean, this is going to be, we're really going to have to pull out some very positive emotions to get the customer to trust our user agent who perhaps they've never met before. So we have an activity in the chapter towards the very end, and they want you, I want you, we want you to go look at a virtual agent and see what the experience is like. What's their interaction style? Do they have facial expressions? Are they believable or pushy or helpful? And the interesting part of the exercise is go find some other e-commerce site that's really doing a comparable transaction, but without a virtual agent, with a browsing interface, and see how that goes. One of the experiences that I have with this is I read a lot of news every morning. Typically, like I'll be on the train on the way up to Milwaukee, and I'll have my iPhone out, and so several of my news sources are really have the classic kind of browsing interface. That's true of AP, which I read every day, and the BBC Online, which I read every day. But one of my news sources is Quartz, and the iPhone app that I have has sort of a virtual agent interface. And so it offers me stories in a text conversation. And then I say that I'm either interested or not, and it might tease me again. So what was kind of interesting is that when I started to use Quartz, I found it really annoying, right? I've gotten to the point where I kind of trust the court's agent. And it's different. I'm not sure I'd want to get all my news that way. But I do like having, one experience a day where my news is coming through a virtual agent. So, and I didn't like that at all in the beginning. So those are the kinds of things that we want you to evaluate in this activity from the text. What makes a virtual agent believable? Okay. The appearance can be important. Are simple cartoon-like characters or more realistic characters resembling the human form more believable? Well, to the extent that I'm going to see something, I think I would like the human form rather than the cartoon form if I'm doing some kind of serious activity. But how about you? How about children? Behavior is important. How an agent moves, gestures, and refers to objects on the screen. Exaggeration of facial expressions and gestures to show underlying emotions. Right? So, most of the user agents, I have to say that most of the user agents who I interact with are pretty, how can I say this? They chat, right? They chat at me. So they don't have an animated form. So they don't have a picture, although there's often a picture of a person. It's always sort of interesting. Like I'll get a technical support and I'll be chatting with something that claims to be a person and I'll see a picture and I'll often ask them, is that a picture of them? And sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. No, that's a picture of a coworker. Or that's a picture of it's a stock photo, right? But most of the intelligent agents that I deal with are pretty chatty still. What about robots? Now, in our family, we've had the robot on the left. That was from Sony, and we got it, it might have been 15 years ago. And it was fun. We played with it for a while. Not a long while. We played with it for a couple of months, and then it sat, and I think it went in one of the garage sales. And it didn't go for a whole lot of money compared to what we originally paid for it. This robot on the left is a more of the cuddly, petable variety and more sense-oriented than talking and verbally oriented. They both have their own. Appeal, right? Personally, I'm sort of a verbally oriented person. I kind of like things I can talk to. I'm still excited by talking to Siri. I think having a robot that rolled around the house and was sort of a butler or a sort of a C3PO would be kind of fun. So I kind of like the talking. Not so concerned about the touchy-feely interface myself, but very interested to hear what you would think. So we've been talking about a lot of this emotional stuff. So what are the implications for us as interaction designers? Well, the first thing is that we should create products that adapt according to the people's different emotional states. Well, I guess that's the question. We're posing this as a question. When people are feeling angry, should an interface be more attentive and informative than they are when they're happy? Well, um, it would be a nice thing to be able to do. It's sort of interesting. It's very hard to get when you call up and you talk to real people. You don't often find people who help you on the telephone seem to be able to sense your emotional state and respond accordingly. But that's because they don't really like their job that much. If in fact we could do that, we could perhaps have our intelligent agents be more effective than actual live people who tend to wear down and get sick of customers. And Norman, one of our researchers, believes that designers can get away with more for products intended to be used during leisure time than those designed for serious tasks. I mean, I really get what he means, and he's got some, I think, research to back this up. When you're playing for keeps, I think you get pissed off easier, right? So if you're trying to use some kind of a medical device that might kill the patient, I think your patience is going to be shorter than if you're trying to do some kind of entertainment game. But the fact is that the fact is, even if this were true, that you could get away with more for leisure products than you could for, say, medical or avionics kinds of projects. Would you want to? I'm not sure that you would. Whereas the question higher up on the slide of would you want your application to be adaptive to the perceived mood or sensitivity of, say, the customer on the other end? Well, I think you would. Like I said before, I think you might be able to come up with an interactive application that's more effective in dealing with people than actual people are. And my experience is that the actual people are only so good at it. So perhaps there's an opportunity there. That brings us to the summary, and I'm going to leave that for you to read on your own. So the pretty interesting chapter. Not only does this give us ideas about how to tune our interaction approach based upon certain research and models and all those kinds of good things. But I think we've also had a pretty good discussion of what kinds of interactions and devices are possible or might become possible in the future. And that's always fun to think about. So I'm going to wrap up here and say bye until next time. Bye-bye.